For what could have been a lost season for Sam Darnold, he did okay in his minimal starts. He had 2 top 8 weekly finishes in his 6 games, and he was injured at the beginning of the season. That's why it was a slow start for him. Look, he was playing behind Baker Mayfield, who eventually got cut, and he was also playing behind veteran PJ Walker. But he had some of the best efficiency stats of his career. He had a 65.5 PFF passer grade, was not very good. I mean, it's 25th among all quarterbacks in PFF passer grade, but it was the best of his career. 8.2 yards per attempt. He had a 7-3 touchdown to interception ratio and a 92.6 NFL passer rating. And among quarterbacks with 160 or more dropbacks, Sam Darnold was second in yards per attempt. And I mentioned he was 25th in PFF pass grade, but that was better than what he had been doing previously in his career. His 14th in NFL passer rating, 29th in adjusted completion percentage. So we were still seeing some accuracy issues with Darnold. He was 3rd in time to throw, so he was getting protection by his offensive line, which is why he was able to throw the ball down the field so well. He was also 14th out of 40 quarterbacks in lowest turnover-worthy play rate and was tied for Aaron Rodgers in that rate. He was 20th of 38 quarterbacks in PFF pass grade under pressure. So middle of the road, not bad for a quarterback who had struggled with accuracy. He was 17th among all quarterbacks in rate of top 10 weeks. It was nice to see some games where Sam Darnold was hitting it on the nuts. He had a top 8 and a top 6 week, to finish out the year. Yes, he sputtered out against New Orleans week 18, but many of us will forget that. And he was 24th in fantasy points per game. So Sam Darnold, who is probably not going to be on the Carolina Panthers next year, maybe he comes back as a backup. I'm not expecting much of a market for Sam Darnold, except for maybe competing for a lower level quarterback's position or a backup role. At least we saw some hints of glory for Sam Darnold this year, but it doesn't give us any confidence that he will retain any sort of starting role moving into 2023. If you like the content and find it helpful, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. Running back D'Onta Foreman was primarily the handcuff to Christian McCaffrey and didn't get almost any snaps until McCaffrey was traded away to San Francisco. Foreman, his season-long stats don't look as good, but that's why we have to look at some of the efficiency metrics. He was 46th in fantasy points per game and 38th in total fantasy points among running backs. Now, this is an interesting thing about D'Onta Foreman, and this is why one of the reasons why you want to be taking these handcuff type of running backs. You don't know whether the lead back is going to get traded, like we saw with Christian McCaffrey, or the running back's going to go down with injury, which we had seen from McCaffrey in previous years. This is why D'Onta Foreman was a good pickup. 6% of the time, he was a top 5 running back. 7.5% of the time, he was between a top 5 and top 10 running back. And 10% of the time, he was between like a top 11 and a flex play. So if you were playing best ball, we're talking about 25, almost 30% of the time, D'Onta Foreman made your best ball lineups. He's 40th among running backs in rate of weeks as a flex play, but the majority of those games came after the Christian McCaffrey trade. He was pretty much a solid running back 2 in volume week to week. He had some nice efficiency metrics, though, as I mentioned. He was 9th in breakaway run rate, and he had the 30th highest juke rate among running backs. So still a starting caliber level juke rate. And he did this against the 9th most defenders in the box. So teams knew that they were going to run with D'Onta Foreman, and he still performed. Now, he was 39th in yards created per touch, and that was because he was a virtual 0 in the passing game. This is crazy. Maybe it's not crazy, but maybe it is crazy. D'Onta Foreman had the lowest yards per route run among all running backs who had at least 100 carries on the season. D'Onta Foreman was also 18th in total rushing yards. He had 930, 26th in PFF rush grade, and he was 10th in yards after contact per attempt. We'll see if D'Onta Foreman re-signs with the Carolina Panthers for 2023 or if he ends up somewhere else, but he's still going to be a very interesting handcuff wherever he goes. I don't think he's earned a starting role, but he has definitely established himself as a quality running back in this league, coming off of a couple years break where he had suffered that Achilles injury that usually was a dooming injury to fantasy careers. But now D'Onta Foreman has proven that you can still be an effective runner a couple years removed from that Achilles injury. So good on D'Onta Foreman. Good on the Carolina Panthers for riding him for particular games. And Foreman will continue to be a very nice handcuff pick in your best ball leagues this coming 2023 season. If you like the content and find it helpful, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. After the Christian McCaffrey trade, Chuba Hubbard was announced as the starter. And in that Tampa Bay game, the first game after the Christian McCaffrey trade, we saw Chuba Hubbard take the lead with touches, with rushes, with snaps up until he got injured. From that point on, he was dealing with the injury. He was working his way back. D'Onta Foreman was playing well. And so Hubbard kind of lost his starting role until near the end of the season, where he was splitting pretty close to 50-50 or even getting some majority of snaps near the end of the season. Hubbard finished 53rd in points per game, 53rd in total fantasy points, but he worked his way back, and you have to give him credit where credit's due. He also had some really nice efficiency metrics. He was 17th among all running backs in true yards per carry, and he was 6th in yards per touch. Now, he wasn't the most elusive of running backs, only 41st in juke rate and 48th in breakaway run rate, but he was a flex play 14.3% of the time. That was 51st among all running back. What's really encouraging for Chuba Hubbard and why I think he's an undervalued best ball pick for 2023 is he was 17th among all running backs in PFF run grade. He was 6th in yards per route run among all running backs. And he was 34th in yards after contact per attempt. So there are some metrics here that indicate to us that not only is Chuba Hubbard a capable runner, but he's also a capable pass catcher and capable route runner. 29th in PFF's elusive rating among running backs. He might be the lead back in Carolina in 2023. We'll see if the Panthers address that in free agency or the draft or in some other respect. But Hubbard is a player that I'm monitoring, and if I can take him cheap as a possible handcuff or even a lead back, that might be interesting. So consider Chuba Hubbard as a late round dart throw running back that you'll want to just rotate through and sprinkle in as you're drafting in 2023. If you like the content and find it helpful, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. Even though this was DJ Moore's worst season since his rookie year in fantasy points per game, he finished as wide receiver 33. Moore had not finished worse than wide receiver 28 in his other 3 seasons. There were still some great metrics that DJ Moore was hitting on for the Carolina Panthers, despite the lost season and the trades of Christian McCaffrey, the turnover from Baker Mayfield to PJ Walker to Sam Darnold. DJ Moore still produced and even set some career highs. So DJ Moore, first in air yard share among all wide receivers. He was 4th in deep targets, 7th in unrealized air yards. And those are indicators that if he were to get open down the field, the quarterback just wasn't hitting him. So if the Carolina Panthers can get a quarterback that is capable, like a Derek Carr, who can hit DJ Moore, we're looking at Moore being that borderline wide receiver 1, maybe a solid wide receiver 2 moving forward. He was 6th best in contested catch rate, 12th in target share, so still in that elite level of almost 28% of targets, 17th in target rate as well, so solid wide receiver 2 in that metric. But the efficiency metrics did not match the total production. Only 888 receiving yards total, despite over 1,500 air yards. Just wild. He did set a career high with 7 touchdowns, but he was 28th in yards per route run, 28th in yards per reception, 18th in yards per team pass attempt. If I were to offer any criticism of DJ Moore himself, was that he was only 61st in route win rate and 77th in win rate versus man. So he wasn't beating his man, okay, on his routes. So he was getting deep, and he was getting open, but his quarterback wasn't hitting him. But even when he was running some routes, right, he still wasn't winning a lot of his routes. So that's what I would offer to DJ Moore, is that he needs to improve on how is he going to win with bad quarterback play. He was 22nd PFF receiving grade, and he played the 15th highest rate of outside snaps. I wonder if those will go down if the Carolina Panthers do address that wide receiver 2 position this year. It's not clear whether Terrace Marshall or some other wide receiver is going to step up as the wide receiver 2 in Carolina. I'll talk about Terrace Marshall in a different video, but DJ Moore, I think, just fits in that wide receiver 2 rate. He was 23rd among wide receivers in rate of weeks where he was at least a flex play, and he was 25th among wide receivers in rate of top 5 weeks. So solid wide receiver 2 with scary floor and high ceiling for DJ Moore. If we get an improved quarterback, we're going to, there is a ton of potential. DJ Moore is a landmine waiting to go off. If the right situation happens, we will see if DJ Moore can explode in 2023. If you like the content and find it helpful, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. Laviska Shenault is one of my favorite players in the NFL, mostly because I think of him being the type of player that all that could be but isn't. Among wide receivers with at least 30 targets, Shenault ranks 2nd in yards per route run. He is explosive on the field. He was 21st among all wide receivers in yards after catch, even though he only had 32 targets on the season. And he was 9th in PFF receiving grade. So there are some nice metrics to Laviska Shenault. He was 17th in NFL passer rating when targeted. But the lack of volume and the bad quarterback play and the bad play calling all culminate into Laviska Shenault just not doing anything for you for fantasy. He had a negative 0.8 average depth of target. Let me repeat that. A negative 0.8 average depth of target. So on average, he was starting, oh my gosh, he was starting almost a full yard behind the line of scrimmage. He was 3 feet behind the line of scrimmage on his targets. Oh my gosh, that's wild to me. Even with all of that in mind, Laviska Shenault finished as a flex play or better 9.5% of the weeks. His role is not secure with the Carolina Panthers. His role is not secure pretty much anywhere if he moves on from Carolina. But he played about 50% of his snaps in the slot. And if the Panthers say, you know what, you played well, you had some nice efficiency metrics, let's see if we can get you more volume. We're not going to replace you. I think Laviska Shenault is, and we see a quarterback upgrade. Laviska Shenault is a player that I'll be willing to cycle through at the back end of my drafts just to say, hey, you know what? I know you haven't produced, but you have some draft capital in your past, former 2nd round pick, and you have some nice efficiency metrics. So while it didn't materialize into fantasy points, I still have a soft spot in my heart for Laviska Shenault. If you like the content and find it helpful, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. The Terrace Marshall truthers were given just a little too much hope during the 2022 season. Terrace Marshall was 1st among all wide receivers in target quality rating, 1st in catchable target rate, and 1st in target accuracy. So when the quarterbacks for Carolina were throwing Terrace Marshall the ball, they were doing so accurately. Good for them and good for Terrace Marshall. Marshall was also 3rd in yards per target. So down the field, he was also 2nd in yards per reception. So that outside downfield threat was the role that Marshall took over for pretty much the entire season. He's 42nd in fantasy points per target. He finished as the top 30 wide receiver twice. And yes, it's mostly because of the bad quarterback play from Baker and PJ Walker and Sam Darnold. He was 60th in PFF receiving grade, which is not great. I mean, back end wide receiver 2 on an off 44th in yards per route run, 35th in NFL passer rating when targeted. As I mentioned, he is an outside type of wide receiver, but I wonder if he plays a little bit more in the slot, that might be a better spot for Terrace Marshall to be useful in. I'm not buying into Terrace Marshall. He was not a player I have almost any of in Dynasty, and thank goodness, because he's been a bust for the last couple of years. And frankly, even when he hit this year, only 1.1% of the time in an adjusted percentile rate type of way, he was a flex play for your best ball teams. Like maybe he hit in 1 week for you. He was 110th among wide receivers in rate of games where he was at least a flex play for you in best ball. So Terrace Marshall, not somebody that I'm very interested in. He didn't give the efficiency metrics that I saw from Laviska Shenault, but he played a completely different role from Shenault. I wonder how the Panthers are also going to address the wide receiver position. There are just so many needs the Panthers have. They have need at quarterback. They have maybe a need at running back. I think a need at running back. They have a need at wide receiver unless they fully commit to the likes of Shenault and Terrace Marshall. So, yeah, I'm still not convinced that Terrace Marshall is the answer at wide receiver 2 or as an outside wide receiver protecting DJ Moore. Even with a quarterback upgrade, I can't see Terrace Marshall being more than the occasional dart throw flex play in 2023. If you like the content and find it helpful, make sure you hit that red subscribe button.